You think you are beating the system when you load up your cart with those massive, beautifully marbled packs of Costco ribeyes. You see that Prime USDA sticker, you see the price per pound, and you feel like you just robbed the place. But you are actually the one being played. Next time you are standing in front of that giant open meat cooler, do me a favor. Pick up a pack of those premium steaks, flip it over, and look closely at the tiny, microscopic fine print right there on the label. You are going to see two words that should absolutely terrify any true steak lover. Blade-tenderized. What does that actually mean? It means before those steaks ever hit the styrofoam tray, they are run through a mechanical machine that punches them with dozens of tiny needles to physically break up the muscle fibers. Why do they do it? To guarantee a tender bite every single time, turning cheaper or tougher cuts into something that feels like premium quality in your mouth. But here is the dirty little secret the big box stores do not want you thinking about. When those needles puncture the surface of the meat, they grab all the surface bacteria, stuff like E. coli that naturally lives on the outside of beef, and they shove it directly into the dead center of your steak. I know this sounds crazy, and honestly a little gross, but stick with me. When you buy a fresh steak from a real local butcher, the bacteria is only sitting on the outside. The second that steak hits a ripping hot cast iron skillet, that bacteria is instantly eradicated. That is exactly why you can eat a butcher's steak rare or medium rare and be perfectly safe. But when a steak is blade tenderized, the bacteria is living right in the middle of the cut. Because of this, the USDA literally recommends cooking mechanically tenderized meat to an internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit to ensure it is safe to eat. 160 degrees. That is well done. You are paying top dollar for prime beef, only to be told by health officials that you have to cook it until it resembles a leather shoe just to avoid getting sick. In my 15 years behind the butcher block and sourcing meat for top-tier steakhouses across the country, I have seen every trick in the book. I know exactly how the industrial meat complex cuts corners to maximize volume over genuine quality. Look, I get it. Meat prices are absolutely insane right now. Groceries are through the roof, and buying in bulk feels like the responsible, smart move for your family's budget. I am not here to shame you for trying to save a buck. I am here to tell you that the math you are doing in your head doesn't actually add up when you factor in what you are really putting on your plate. Now, you might be asking yourself, if Costco is doing this, is my local butcher doing it too? Not a chance. A real butcher respects the animal and respects the craft. They are bringing in whole subprimals or breaking down whole carcasses. They don't need a machine to make their meat tender because they are sourcing better cattle, dry aging it properly, and cutting it fresh right in front of you. But the rabbit hole goes so much deeper than just those tiny needles. We haven't even talked about water weight, the illusion of the grading system, and what you are actually paying for when you buy meat by the pound at a warehouse. If you want to stop ruining your expensive steaks and finally discover exactly what you are feeding your family, hit that subscribe button right now. Because my name is Kaka, you are watching Cost Kaka, and we are just getting started on this investigation. You think you are getting a steal at $19.99 a pound for that warehouse prime beef, right? You look at the massive slab of meat, do the math in your head, and feel like a financial genius. Here is what they are not telling you about that price tag. You are not just paying for beef. You are paying for a whole lot of water. Let me take you behind the curtain of the industrial meat complex. When you buy a steak at a big box store, it has almost certainly been wet-aged. That sounds fancy, but in reality, it just means the meat was shoved into a vacuum-sealed plastic bag the second it was processed and left to sit in its own juices for weeks while it shipped across the country. Because it is sealed in plastic, none of the natural moisture can escape. In fact, Some commercial meat processors even pump their cheaper cuts with a saltwater and chemical solution, sometimes called enhancing or plumping, which can add up to 15% more weight to the package. Why does that matter to you? Because the second that wet, waterlogged steak hits your hot grill, all that trapped moisture instantly evaporates. Your beautiful, thick, 1-pound steak suddenly shrinks up like a sponge. You aren't searing your meat. You are accidentally steaming it in its own purged liquids. You paid top dollar for a pound of steak, but by the time it hits your dinner plate, you are only eating a fraction of that. Now, compare that to a real, old-school butcher. A master butcher dry ages their premium beef. They hang the cuts in a climate-controlled room where the water slowly evaporates over weeks. Yes, the meat loses physical weight, but what gets left behind is pure, concentrated, unbelievably rich beef flavor. When you buy a 1-pound dry-aged steak from a butcher, you are getting 1 pound of actual meat. It cooks faster, it sears perfectly, and it doesn't shrink into a sad, gray hockey puck on your stove. But the deception does not stop at the scale. We need to talk about that shiny, gold, USDA Prime sticker you trust so much. Most people believe that if a steak has a Prime sticker, it is guaranteed to be a top-tier, melt-in-your-mouth cut. That is the biggest illusion in the supermarket meat case. Here is the secret the grading agencies don't advertise. The USDA does not grade individual steaks. They grade the entire carcass of the cow based on a single cut made between the 12th and 13th ribs. If that one specific spot has enough fat marbling, the entire animal gets rubber stamped as prime. That means the giant chain stores are buying massive shipments of prime beef sight unseen, relying entirely on that one blanket grade. You could easily be paying a premium price for a tough, lean cut of meat from a prime-graded cow, just because of a technicality. A local butcher does not buy blindly based on a sticker. They inspect the actual marbling, the color, and the texture of the specific subprimal cuts before they ever hand over their cash. They know that a beautifully marbled, choice cut from a small, well-raised local farm will absolutely destroy a factory-farmed, prime cut that spent its life crammed in a commercial feedlot. You are paying for a label, not for quality. If your mind is blown by the water weight and the grading scam, you are not going to believe what actually happens to the unsold, expiring meat sitting at the bottom of those massive warehouse coolers. Stick around, because in the final part of this investigation, I am exposing the most stomach-churning profit trick in the grocery industry, and it will change the way you buy ground beef forever. We've looked at the stakes, we've exposed the water weight scam, and we've busted the grading myth. But if you think that's the end of the grocery store smoke and mirrors, you are dead wrong. We need to talk about the most common item in your freezer, that 3-pound chub or plastic tray of ground beef. You walk into the warehouse and see those massive tubes labeled 80/20ths or 90/10ths. It feels like a safe, standard product, right? But here is what the packaging doesn't explain. Ground beef is the ultimate catch-all for the meat industry. In a factory setting, when they are breaking down thousands of carcasses a day, there is a massive amount of trim. These are the scraps, the trimmings, the odds and ends that aren't pretty enough to be sold as steaks or roasts. In the industrial meat world, that trim doesn't get tossed. It gets tossed into the grinder. Here is the kicker. You have no idea where that meat came from. You could be buying a single package of ground beef that contains meat from 50 different cows from 3 different countries. If one of those cows had a pathogen issue, or if the mixing equipment wasn't sanitized perfectly during that shift, you are not just getting a burger. You are playing Russian roulette with your digestion. When you walk into a real butcher shop, they are taking a specific cut, like a chuck roast or a brisket, and they are grinding that entire piece of meat right in front of you. You know exactly what it is. You know exactly what is in it. And most importantly, it was ground that morning. That difference isn't just about being a food snob. It is about texture and safety. Because industrial meat is processed in such massive volumes and shipped in those tight plastic logs, it has to be packed extremely tight to prevent spoilage during transit. That creates a dense, pasty texture that turns your burger into a tough, rubbery disc on the grill. But the butcher's grind? It is loose, it is airy, and it holds its moisture without the need for preservatives or extra fat additives. When you cook a burger from a real butcher, it actually has flavor. It doesn't just taste like meat. It tastes like beef. I know. You are going to say, Kaka, the local butcher is more expensive. And you are right. They are. But when you factor in that you aren't paying for 15% water weight, and you aren't paying for the privilege of eating someone else's scraps, the price gap shrinks dramatically. You are voting with your wallet every single time you shop. You can keep buying the convenient, mass-produced mystery meat, or you can find a local shop, get to know your butcher, and actually see what goes into your food. The choice is yours, but now you know the truth behind the packaging. You are being lied to by the convenience. Stop settling for the industrial standard and start demanding real quality. If this investigation changed the way you look at your grocery cart, do me a favor and smash that like button. It really helps us keep exposing the truth in the food industry. And if you have a local butcher you swear by, drop their name in the comments so others can find them. My name is Kaka. You've been watching Kaka, and I will see you in the next investigation.